So this is the official beginning. Ooh, and a generalized fish. I love that. Love having fish in the chat. I was hoping there'd be at least some fish. Okay. Welcome officially to Mermaiding 101. I'll be your mermaid today. First, before we dive in, a little bit about me. You may know me as Kalixa, Daedra, Nixa, or Namaya. I'm a being of many names. I'm a demi-human, a water nymph, a mermaid, and a cat Cambotherian, which includes being cat-hearted. I also sort of coined the term alterfae on a Reddit post a while ago. If you've seen that, I'm the one who did that. Also, a little break here to say if you want to follow along with the slides or the script, I have posted the links for that in panel questions, I believe. I I'm pretty sure I put that in the right place. If I didn't, let me know and I'll put it there. But the link should be there for the PDFs if you want to follow along. Okay, so let's maybe get a little bit into my experience with the mermaiding community. Why should you care what I have to say? Um, I awakened to being a mermaid after watching H2O Just Add Water in 2010 when I was about 10 years old. So I've been in and about the mermaiding community for a while. I joined the mermaiding community shortly after awakening, but mainly as a lurker since I didn't have a tail of my own. I really wanted to learn all that I could about tail making and the mermaiding community. And the community gave me the confidence to actually affirm my mermaid identity to others, even when they would deny it. So the mermaiding community kind of is very much intertwined with my sense of self as a mermaid and the way that I've historically expressed it over over more than a decade. Um, Okay, so there's some terms I've already been throwing around a little bit. So let's finally dive in. I see some celebration for H2O in the in the chat, and I really appreciate that because I feel like it's underappreciated mermaid media for sure. Okay, so starting off in the shallows, what the fluke even is mermaiding? In short, mermaiding verb refers to the act or hobby of making and or swimming in mermaid tails. Yes, I'm pedantic as heck, so I wrote it like a dictionary definition. Making non-swimmable mermaid tails is not usually considered to be within the realm of mermaiding, but it sometimes can be on a case-by-case basis. The mer community, a collective noun, is a handy nickname for the mermaiding community, including professionals and hobbyists. Mermaid, merman, merperson, or merfolk is the community term for a member or members of the mer community, specifically one who engages in mermaiding, which again is usually specifically the act of tail swimming, which we'll talk about more soon. An exception to this, though, which also counts as an exception to the mermaiding is only when your tail is swimmable rule. Sorry, swimmable is an ironically hard word for me to say. Um, so an exception to the tail can must be swimmable rule is if a mer is disabled in such a way where they cannot swim, they're not precluded from being a member of the mer community at all. As you'll come to see, disability is actually pretty entwined with the mer community. But in cases like that where someone can't swim, their tail may be made of non-swimmable materials for that reason. And for that person, it would still be mermaiding and they'd still be considered part of the mer community. So that's a pretty common reason why you might see like a non-swimmable tail, but in general, mermaiding is considered to be specifically swimmable mermaid tails. A group of mer people is called a pod, and gatherings are typically called meetups. That's our like equivalent of a howl. There's still some terminology here which may not be clear, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so here's some more fundamental terms. Some of these you might have already picked up on, but tail swimming, another verb, is the act of swimming in a swimmable mermaid tail. Please do not swim in a non swimmable mermaid tail. You'll come to understand what constitutes a swimmable versus a non swimmable tail over the course of this panel. Again, please do not swim in a non swimmable mermaid tail. Please. A tail maker, noun, is someone who commonly makes and or sells swimmable mermaid tails. You can be a commercial tail maker if tail making is your business or your profession, or you can be like a personal or a hobbyist tail maker if you primarily make tails for yourself or maybe like for close friends. A monofin noun is one of the most important aspects of mermaiding. It's like a pair of scuba fins connected together, but it's not exactly that. So probably don't default to like taping scuba fins together if you don't if you unless you have like no other options. Um I'm glad to hear that y'all like the dictionary like slides um and the accessibility options cuz yeah, very very important. Okay. So next, monofin. To describe it in a bit more detail, monofin holds both feet together and it has one large blade that efficiently propels the wearer through the water with a dolphin kick. It is an essential, unskippable part of tail swimming. Because of the commonality of monofins, specifically in tail swimming, MERS in the community will often refer to scuba fins as bifins in contrast, but you only really hear that in the mer community, I think. I haven't really encountered that terminology outside of the mer community. I have to remember to call them like scuba fins or swim fins when I'm talking to other people, but by default, I will refer to them as bifins in contrast to monofins. Um, and lastly, we have the tail skin noun, which is a body sleeve that is designed to tightly hold the monofin and its wearer together. And that's what completes the merperson look. You actually tried no fin monoswimming this or merswimming this summer. I managed to get a backward motion down really quickly. Yeah, I would not recommend swimming without a fin. It is very important for safety. I'm not gonna say I guess that you will immediately definitely drown, but like maybe don't do it if you can avoid it. There's good reason for that that I'll get into in later slides. Besides just personal safety, which is already important. Okay, so now that we've gone over the serious fundamental terms, how about some like fun, frivolous terms? So you'll notice that the mer community as a whole has a penchant for puns. So here's how to sound like you've been around the community for decades. If you throw some of these out, people will think that you've been around since like 2012. First, we have the shell phone. Very important mer communication device. Almost every mer has one. They may invite you to call them on their shell phone, or they may greet you with a shello instead of a hello. Um, there's also landlocked, an adjective, which is being unable to get to the water to swim. So that can be a result of geography, or like if you have no access to water, like pools or natural bodies of water, or a result of circumstance. So, like you have access to water, but you don't have time or transportation to go swimming. Any of those things can result in a mer being landlocked. Similarly, if a mer is landlocked for too long, they may become seasick, which in the mer community means experiencing sorrow and longing for the water. It's akin to the concept of homesickness for land dwellers, but for the ocean or water for mers. Although a mer can still become seasick in like the nauseous human sense, but more likely if you see mers saying that they're seasick, it means that they're like homesick for the water. A lot of those terms developed over time in the online work community, but despite growing in population, mainly due to online connection, the roots of the mer community are actually very old and very deep. So this is the asterisk, by the way, to the Wikiwachi mermaid show being foundational. Yes, but this. So, professional mermaids, which is a mermaid performer for whom mermaiding is their business or primary source of income, are actually kind of the backbone of the mer community in many ways. They're not the most populous part, I would say, of the mer community, at least in my experience. That might have changed more recently. But in general, there are more hobbyists than professionals, but professionals get a lot of the spotlight, so they will often seem to be more populous. And in general, the needs and the desires of professional mermaids are actually often what pioneer advancements for the rest of the community. So they're really foundational. The first known professional mermaid was Annette Kellerman, who is an Australian disabled swimmer, actress, and activist who was born in 1886. She pioneered for the women's right to swim in one piece bathing suits instead of pantaloons and layered clothing, which I cannot imagine everyone being forced to swim in that much clothing. But that is what women were forced to do at the time for modesty. And so you can thank Annette Kellerman for the proliferation of bathing suits. Um, She suffered partial paralysis as a child, and swimming was her physical therapy, and it became her whole world. She got really, really good at it, and she was the first known mermaid performer to perform in a tank. She's also the first known nude film actress. She played a nude goddess in the 1916 film A Daughter of the Gods, which is now lost media. She also played an aquatic fairy in Queen of the Sea in 1918, which is also now lost media. She performed all of her own diving stunts, including deep diving almost 100 feet in the sea, and diving with crocodiles. She often played mermaids who were named Annette or a similar variation of her own name. And she was also her own tail maker. So, truly an inspiring woman after my own heart. Um, Not to speculate too much, but it's truly giving alter human esque activity in my opinion, especially given that the characters that she played were pretty much always named after her. Um, so yeah, Annette Kellerman is a rock star that I think a lot more people should know of, and essentially the first professional mermaid and the first like documented mermaider, I guess you would say, that we know of in terms of like someone who's doing the activity of mermaiding. Um, Another more well-known foundational piece of early mermaiding history that you've already seen mentioned in the chat is the Weeki Wachee Springs Mermaid Show in Florida. It first opened to the public around 1947. Their tails were actually designed after Annette Kellerman's, or at least designed similarly to her, so they look very similar. So you'll see that continuity is there. The mer community builds off of itself and off of professional mermaids specifically. They performed in, or they still perform in a large aquarium tank, and they have air hoses hidden among the coral and the rocks to provide the performers with air so they can continue to stay underwater for a long time, which is my literal dream that I dream about all the time. Someone give me a tank with coral and hidden air hoses, please. Um, so yeah, I digress. But a lot of like Soul System said, a lot of mermaiding is foundational to Wiki Wachee Springs, but with the asterisk that a lot of Wiki Wachee Springs mermaiding was actually foundationally started with Annette Kellerman. So, but yeah, Wikiwachi Springs is a bit more commonly known as one of the oldest pieces of mermaiding history that is still going to this day. And I found out in the chat that they do classes now, which is really cool. Mermaiding classes are a bit more of a recent development that I can also talk about a little bit later. Okay, so the next part of mermaiding history that we'll talk about is a big jump forward to the internet age from like the early 1900s and mid 1900s. So beginning as Meryuku, I believe in the 90s and early 2000s, Meryuku would later become Mer Network, which was created by Mermaid Iona as a forum for the mermaiding community. This was my online home for all things mermaiding as a child and an early teen. Mers were constantly posting about their tailmaking adventures, new ideas, their mermaid identities or other identities, pod meetups, tail designs, new tailmaking methods, mer community drama bubbles, and more, which is another fun term. But pretty much everything you could ever want to know or do involving the mer community could be found on Mer Network. You could find pods, meetups, new methods, all of those things. It was truly a haven, and I lurked here for a while before I got my first tail. But unfortunately, as social media sites grew and took over forums, and oh, Zero asks, what is drama bubbles? So a drama bubble is basically like it's essentially the same thing as drama in any other community, but it's the idea that like something there's like an inciting incident sort of, and people will talk about it and talk about it, and that's like the bubble growing and growing, and then once like it starts to really explode into the wider community, like once everyone knows about it and there's fallout from it, like someone gets canceled or whatever, that's the drama bubble popping. So there's a particularly big drama bubble that I might talk about in a little bit. It's one of my favorite examples. Um, but or maybe I shouldn't talk about it because it's a drama bubble and this is recorded. So I guess I shouldn't. But maybe after, ask me after the recording ends, and I'll tell you what the drama bubble is. Okay. Oh, also I might be talking too fast. I do that a lot. I should probably slow down. Okay. So we're talking about Mer Network. By the late 2010s and early 2020s, it was mostly dead, but I still accessed it via Tapatalk every now and again. I did say when I last gave this panel, which was unofficial at the it's like post OtherCon 2025 little week there. I think I said at that time that it was defunct, and I think I couldn't access it at the time for some reason, like the site was down. But I looked it up again recently, and you can still access it. But it is like most of the recent posts and replies are bot spam, but it is still kind of a nostalgic time capsule, and there is like a trove of gems there if you peruse carefully, but just, be careful what you click on. But you can still access Mer Network and see a lot of the old posts. You'll notice that anything of substance or most things of substance are like probably from 2015 at the latest. Most of it's like earlier than that, 2012, 2011 or so. Okay, next slide. So now we get to some of the exciting stuff. The reason why I wanted to have lots of different types of beings here. Despite the name, mermaiding is not just for mermaids. On Mer Network and other Mer community spaces, I remember interacting with a variety of Mers with a variety of identities and interests, including but not limited to Mer people, of course, sirens, selkies, hippocampuses, sharks, whales, fish, aquatic dragons, and more. Probably clams. Probably lots of mollusks. While the Mer community has always been focused on the visual and physical practice of tail making and tail swimming, there has always been an understanding that Mers are in the community for different reasons, ranging from professionals for whom this is just a job, TM, to Mers who feel deeply connected to an aquatic identity, like me, for example. Many mer people would express their personal identities or interests via the unique tail designs by mimicking fish or whales or evoking the mythical qualities of their altertype, as we'd call them now, but we didn't have that terminology back then. Um, Such naturalistic mers would often make like realistic fish-like tails, like you can see with the lionfish tail in the lower left corner, or the orca tail at the top, at the like just next to the lionfish tail. The seal-like tail is often a common example for selkies, and you can see an example in the middle there. There's also the clownfish-like tail. But I've seen actually a prominent example of a shark tail wraps back around to the whole intertwining of disability with the mer community. Brief tangent. I don't remember her name unfortunately, and I couldn't find like the resource again. But I do remember sometime in the mid 2010s an article about a woman who was a double leg amputee, and so had to use a wheelchair on land, but spent a lot of time after that in the water with a custom made mermaid tail that that looked incredible because of the lack of like lower shins and everything, but she was able to use it so fluidly and move so freely in the water. And one of the things that I love about the Murray community for that reason is just how quintessential like like they're so intertwined, like disability in the Murray community in a way that's sort of unentangleable, or undisentangleable. And yeah, it was incredibly stunning to see, and I think that that was, I mean, it wasn't the foundation of extended tails, but I do know that the design of her tail did push, extended tails forward because of how much people were really interested in, the lack of like the look of not having ankles. Um, so yeah, there's like the mer community and disability are very related to each other. If anyone tries to tell you that you can't be a mer person or you can't do mermaiding because of a disability reason, um, tell them to fluke off. Okay. So yeah, that was a little detour that I don't think was in the script, but I really wanted to mention. Also because she specifically had a shark tail, so I thought it was a good place to put in here. I do remember that her tail was a shark tail. Um, but yeah, this kind of makes a good segue into the next topic, which is tail making. So to talk about tail making, let's just understand the basic anatomy of a mermaid tail. I've mentioned the word fluke a couple of times, but I haven't described it yet. So a fluke is like the whole bottom part of a tail. So what people would usually refer to as the fin, that's the term for that is the fluke. The tail skin, as I mentioned earlier, is like the whole thing, but specifically the part of it that's the skin, not the underlying structure. The monofin is the underlying structure that you can't see in this design, but it would have to be underneath this design for it to actually stay stiff. Um, Then there's extra fins that you'll often see on tails. So the fins at like that are like on the front of your quads would be called pectoral fins. They're called that because of where they would be on a fish. So there's kind of this like blending of fish anatomy and like human anatomy that happens when it comes to naming parts of tails. So the like front quad fins are called pectoral fins because they would be on the pectoral part of a fish, even though they're not on your chest as like a person physically. But then any other thing that doesn't correspond exactly to where a fish would have it is like talked about using human terminology. So if you have them lower on the back of your calves, then those would be calf fins. There's also ankle fins if they're like right where your fluke meets the rest of your tail skin. Those are called ankle fins. So those are some like basic parts of the anatomy of a mermaid tail. So now diving a bit more into tail making. So you've now seen or you've heard of what a monofin is. So we're going to talk about some of the distinct types of monofins. Even the variety that you see here is only a fraction of what's available. So it's important to know what your needs are and what's available when you're choosing a monofin. Some of the cheapest ones available are composed of a hard plastic insert over a fabric sleeve. So examples of that are the fin fun monofin and the suntail monofin, pictured to the left. The suntail monofin looks very much like the fin fun monofin, so that one picture works for both of them. Um, so some of the earliest ones of these, which I actually did have, were made of clear acrylic instead of like a plastic or a silicone. That was not super safe. My monofin cracked in half while I was swimming in a pool full of children. So, but I was like fine. I got it replaced with one of the sturdier plastic ones that they make now. They're fine now. Um, yeah, my replacement monofin has lasted like 10 years since I got it replaced, but I'm really glad that they realized that that was unsafe and they fixed it. But if you see that kind of clear acrylic monofin in a fabric sleeve, don't trust that monofin maker. Um, but yeah, so yeah, these sort of monofins with the plastic insert, and the fabric sleeve, the fabric being what holds your feet to the blade, those are usually marketed towards kids and beginners, mainly because they're really easy to get out of quickly since there's no straps. It's just the stretchiness of the fabric that holds you in there, so you can really kick it off really easily. They're best for pools and water that's not too deep or treacherous because they're not very powerful because of their design. So next we have monofins with a small blade and molded foot pockets. Most of the rest of these have molded foot pockets. These are a bit stronger and a bit more professional, but they're typically geared towards free divers. So free diving is the hobby of diving and swimming without the aid of scuba gear. So it's typically more focused on breath hold rather than learning to breathe underwater and having lots of gear. Free divers will often swim with like nothing but a monofin and their normal swimsuit rather than like a wetsuit and things that scuba divers will have, plus the tanks and everything. So they also tend to use efficient strokes like the dolphin kick, which are very efficient for swimming because they have to rely completely on their breath holds for how long and how long they can stay underwater and how far they can go. Um, and they also focus a lot. The freediving community focuses a lot on safe diving techniques, which gives it a lot of crossover with the mermaiding world actually. So a lot of advances in freediving were adopted into the mermaiding community, at the same time. And the mermaiding community would often like follow what's happening in the freediving community to be able to adapt these techniques into mermaiding because it's just incredibly useful. So freediving is like the more acceptable standard form of mermaiding without like the whimsical mermaid or aquatic life form associations. It's just the straight up swimming with a breath hold activity. So yeah, freediving monofins are often built more for the straight up power of swimming and not really for the aesthetics with a fish-like shape. So that doesn't really you don't see the fish-like shape really with monofins that are designed for freediving. So you can see with the fin fun and suntail, those are designed for monofinning. So or sorry, for mermaiding. So that's why they look like a fish. But the freediving monofins don't look like fish because they're not designed for mermaiding. They're designed for freediving. Um, Similarly, monofins with larger blades are better suited to swimming in open or deep water with stronger currents, which is often also where you'll find a lot of free divers. I have swim in water with currents with a fin fun monofin, but I would not recommend doing so, especially not with other experienced swimmers and especially mermaiders around. Um, So that kind of covers the molded foot pockets with the small blade and the larger and more powerful blades, both of them designed for free divers. So next we come to the full silicone monofins with full silicone molded foot pockets, and everything is all together molded in one. These are my beloved. They are typically designed with mermaiding in mind, and they have this powerful combination of both a seamless mermaiding aesthetic with a powerful kicking power and propulsion. But that last part does depend on the size of the monofin. So like the Mahina Merfin, I really enjoy. It's very beautiful and very powerful. I haven't necessarily tried a fitness competitor, but I imagine that it's probably at least at least around half as powerful, if not more. Whereas I don't think the FinFun could compare to the fitness competitor like at all. They are very expensive. Yes, monofins are really expensive. They're definitely an investment. This is why I want to give you the information that you need to be able to be informed when it comes to making decisions about monofins, because there are a lot of options out there. And if you can make the best choice for you for like the foreseeable future at the start, you can do this like one-time investment that you'll be able to use many, many times over like years and years. And it will be a lot better to, spend $400 once and get a really good monofin that really works well for you and like where you're going to be swimming and what you want to do with it, than to, buy a $50 monofin once, if you can even find something that cheap, and then have to, upgrade to a $150 one, and then a $250 one, and then a 400 one. So, yeah, kind of laying it out on the table. This is information that I had to glean over searching through forums and different providers and stuff over lots of years. So, quick little summary. Again, this is still just a fraction of what's available. This is just kind of covering most of the market that's easy to find, and that's easy, like relatively easy to acquire. That's a caveat that I'll get to in a second. Um, let's see if there's anything else I want to say about the full molded monofin. No, okay, that's it. So lastly, we're coming to the Luna set monofin, which I guess brings you back to like easy to acquire. So this falls into the category of an extended monofin. These are not very easy to acquire. They're pretty hard to find. The only commercial one that I was able to find very easily is the Luna set monofin. Um, Extended monofins, they have extra joints that connect the foot pocket to the blade, at least like a small little rod with flexible points at each end. So that allows the tail to look much more flowy in the water, and it gives the illusion that the mer doesn't have ankles, which is really helpful for realism. Um, Sometimes that can come directly with a decrease in power. So, someone mentioned earlier that they were an aquatic Asian dragon. So, what my like qualified recommendation would be something like an extended tail, because I feel like if you're like that long and bendy, the no ankles bit would probably be extremely affirming. However, you would have to work up to doing an extended monofin, because the loss in like it's a lot more finagly. The loss in power and control could be dangerous if you are not already familiar with the different steps up to this point. Um, okay. So, okay, one last thing I want to say about extended monofins before moving on is that the feature has been independently created for movies, TV shows, and custom tails many times over, which is why you'll actually see extended tails more often than you'll see extended monofins. So, like I said, the Luna set's the only one that I was able to really find easily, but I've seen so many extended tails. It's just that most MERS or tail makers will like make their own extended monofin to make the idea work, rather than like the Luna set is one of the first ones that actually was like, let me offer a commercial solution to the problem that a bunch of people are independently solving over and over again. But speaking of mer people in film and TV and extended tales used in that context, let's talk about some famous SFX tales. So I would argue that the oldest tail makers, besides the fabric tails that were worn by Annette Kellerman and the early Wikiwachi mermaids, are actually by SFX artists. So, once again, the professional mers, being the actors in these movies and TV shows, being the pioneers of something that would later become foundational to the mer community by just acting as merpeople. These movie magic makers would make masterpieces for mermaid movie mers. Try saying that 10 times fast. These tails, each of them are completely custom masterpieces, usually a combination of silicone, foam, PVC, individually laid scales, and probably more. They take thousands of hours of work, or they they probably take thousands of hours of work between people, probably less than that once you all combine them, but some of them definitely have taken that much because I know at least that the H2O just add water tails have like individually laid plastic scales that were all laid by hand. I've watched the video on that a bunch of times. Um, so their features often included like custom sculpted flukes that are sculpted specifically to the tail. So like no like essentially the structure of the monofin is baked into the tail itself. There isn't like a separate piece that's separate from the tail skin. It's all one constructed thing that's designed to work together and to only be one piece. At the same time, for that reason, they're all custom made to the measurements of each actress. And each actress or actor will usually have a team of safety people who's with them as well. So very custom, and usually not super repeatable. Um, so you might have seen some of these tales in like Splash, The 13th Year, Aquamarine, and H2O are common examples. These films and TV shows were really inspiring to a lot of the mer community for obvious reasons. So you might actually recognize these tales as well, even if you haven't seen these shows, because a ton of quote unquote like copycat tales will exist. So I've seen the most common ones that I've seen are splash tails. So if you see like an orange and black tail that has a similar pattern to this, they were probably inspired by Splash. H2O tails are semi-common, but not as common as Splash and Aquamarine tails. The 13th Year, I will say, not super common. People know about it, but there aren't as many tales that are inspired by that directly. One of the more common ones also that I didn't depict because it's not like technically mermaiding is Ariel. Ariel's probably second most common to Splash, but because she's animated, there's no actual tail making involved in the process. But Ariel tails were also really, really common designs as well. Um, okay, so I think that's everything that I want to say for this slide. So now let's talk about like non-SFX tail making. So a lot of the practices for SFX tail makers were sort of picked up on a smaller scale for custom tails. So you could see silicone tails from professional tail makers. But even still, these were still custom made to a particular person. And they would still be like upwards of $5,000. And that's $5,000 in 2010 money, which is still far less than the tens of thousands of dollars that every individual SFX movie tale would cost, but still pretty unachievable for the average mer. So even though there were these full silicone tail makers who were like adapting SFX styles to be able to make them more commercial, they were still pretty much out of the price point for most mers at the time when I was very active in the mer community from like the 2010s to early 2020s. Um, Nowadays, though, you will see a lot more, like, commonly, full silicone tails or tails that look like full silicone tails, which we'll get into a little bit more, because of a variety of factors. But one of them is that sort of thing of professional MERS getting a lot more spotlight, and MERS that are not professional MERS that are, hobbyists or DIYers kind of falling out of the spotlight within the community, and not really getting as much of the credit that they deserve for some of the foundational techniques uh, that they helped inspire as well, because they're not as polished looking as the full silicone tails or some of these other tail techniques. But we're going to talk about some of the other tail. Oh, I'm so sorry about the phantom shifts and wanting to be in the ocean. I completely get you. The seasickness is very real. I should have given like a warning for potentially incurring seasickness in people as soon as I told you what it is. Some of the tail making techniques that I want to cover. So I've already mentioned a little bit about silicone tails, specifically their tails that are like fully molded out of silicone, very custom designed to the maker. Their design and measurements are always custom made to order. Sometimes you can get them pre-made, but if your measurements aren't exactly the same, they won't fit you very well. Besides that, there are latex tails, which I side eye because they're kind of like the low quality, less pretty cousin of silicone tails. Like the material is a bit more accessible for people to get their hands on, but people were making all kinds of latex tails that really should not have been made and didn't stand up to the test of time. The material just isn't as good as silicone, and it's not as safe for everyone, so that's why latex tails get a side eye in my book. There's also fabric tails, again, my beloved. They're probably the most accessible way to get a tail. They're much more inexpensive to acquire. You can customize them yourself very easily with simple skills like painting and sewing or adding sequins. There is also this very niche style of tail making, or I don't even know if you'd call it tail making at this point, but a very unique style of mer tail that does exist still, but it was really hard to find images of, but I really wanted to include it because it's also very accessible, which is the exposed monofin or leggings style. So you can see up here, like image 26, there is, I believe that's a fantasy monofin and fish scale leggings. So that's a combination that you'll also see with people who like maybe have invested in a monofin already, but they can't afford a tailskin to go over it yet. There's also a version where you do have like a tailskin, but instead of having a full fluke, it kind of like I don't know how to like diapers over the the monofin and the two fins, like the sides of the fluke are like poking out of it. That was, I will say, like it wasn't common, but it wasn't uncommon in like the mid 2010s to 2000s, or actually probably in the early 2010s to be more accurate. But it fell so out of favor that I actually couldn't find any reference photos of it. I found one like months ago, but I tried to find it again and I couldn't find a credit for it or the image at all again. So I couldn't put an example of that in there, but it does exist. Um, there's also partial silicone tails, which are a fabric base, so fabric tail base with silicone over the top. I've made one of those. It's like an okay middleman, but will probably be more happy with either a fabric tail or a silicone tail unless you have like the money to spend on that in between stage. They can look nice, but usually not as nice as a full silicone or a full fabric, in my personal opinion. One that I do want to give special attention to is a individual scale tail. That's another way of making a partial silicone tail is not just like pouring silicone over the fabric, but actually by making individual scales of silicone and attaching them to the fabric. That's one way. There's another way I'll talk about in a second. So image 27 shows that sort of individual scale method. You can tell the difference because if you look closely at like 24, that's a scale sheet. So all of the scales are identical, and they're usually made of like circles of foam that were cut out and laid over each other. So the scales are very uniform. It all looks like it's one piece molded together. But an individual scale tail has a lot more variation on the scales themselves because basically each of them are individually molded. So it just looks really cool. This technique was actually inspired by a mermaid by the name of Pearly May, who I was on the forum at the time when she posted this method, and it was actually called the Pearly May method for a long time. And unfortunately, I tried to find references to Pearly May or the Pearly May method, and I couldn't find them anymore. So that's a really sad thing that the community has lost. So I wanted to give Pearly May a shout out in this like segment here. Now it's usually just called the individual scale method, but Pearly May really pioneered it. So credit where credit's due. The last way of making individual scale tail actually combines like sewing and fabric tails. So there's not really silicone involved here at all. That's exemplified in image 29 here with the mythic tail. That's a Finfolk mythic. If you've been around in the community for a while, you can kind of just tell who made certain things by looking at it. So this is a Finfolk mythic. The individual scales are made of resin. I think they're made of resin or something resin-like. They look more uniform, like a scale sheet, because they're made each on the same exact mold, and they're kind of like really really big durable sequins, and then you sew them on individually. So that's another way of making individual scale tail. Um, okay. Oh, also, I'm gonna answer all the questions at the end. I It's hard for me to like keep track of the panel chat as it's going at the same time. So if you have a question that you really, really want me to answer, make sure to put them in the panel questions so that I will definitely see it by the end. I'll try to like answer them in the chat if I see them at the moment, but I might not. Okay, so let's talk about tail makers. I mentioned them a little bit a second ago. I mentioned that like if you're in the community for a long time, you can often tell who a tail is made by just looking at it. So some of these have watermarks, so you can clearly tell by that. But the top left one is a finfolk, the top right is a mertailer, the bottom left is a mernation, and the bottom right is my heart and soul that I would love a full silicone tail from one day, a merbella. What else do I want to say? Yeah, so these are all full silicone tails. You can see a lot of the extra detail that you can get with a full silicone tail that's a lot harder to get with some of those other designs. You can see how like custom molded they are to the body of the wearer, and they just do such a good job of giving that like physical mer illusion while also giving you such a fine level of detail in the designs that you can do. So these are really kind of like a feat of engineering and making SFX mermaid tail techniques more available to consumers. Um, Really cool stuff. I was very jealous of every full silicone tail that I saw in like 2010. Um, I would spend a lot of time looking longingly at these and just thinking about how I could make a fabric tail look somehow as special as these. At the time when I was younger, fabric tails were usually seen as like a starter, like basic tail, um, and not really as like a special. They were kind of just like a stepping stone to you'd want to eventually get to a full silicone if you could. They didn't really get a lot of their own highlight. Um, but yeah, they were usually very plain for that reason. Even sometimes people making their own tails as hobbyists, they'd be very plain unless they were very passionate about fabric tails. But so let's talk about some of the tails that you might see in the early 2010s and so if you were passionate about fabric tails or if they were made by someone who was. So this is very much like a blast of the past. I don't think any of these images is like a day over 2017. And that's probably that's probably playing it safe. I miss tales like this. I will be honest. I don't see them as much anymore. Um, so from the top left, that's Hannah Fraser. I don't know the names of all these people, but some of them I do because because I watched them as a kid, like I knew them and they were in the community and we interacted. Or directly or indirectly. So I know Hannah Fraser, which is the top left. Stella the Siren is the middle here with the red clown fishtail. Courtney Mermaid is the one in like the middle right with the green sequin tail. I yeah, I would definitely I really if you can make your own fabric tail in this way, I think that it's not only an incredibly connecting experience to be able to basically sew your own skin together in a sense and make literally make yourself, but it's such an incredibly like unique experience that I feel like the American community has really lost in a lot of ways. The expressiveness and individuality of tails used to be so almost like a guarantee. Like at the time, you could just look at I would honestly be able to recognize a mer by their tail even more than their face. To be honest, like I would see a bunch of mers swimming in a pod in murky water, and I could tell who was who because of their tails. It was like facial identification, and that is something the mer community has lost. I think the next slide talks a bit more about why, but yeah, these handmade designs were also innovative. People were doing all kinds of different techniques. Not like no two of these tails on this page are made using the exact same technique. In fact, the one that Hannah Fraser is wearing is actually a variation of the individual scale method like a mythic, but it's done with sequins. So cool. Okay. I know it's so cool, right? I want to talk about it for hours, but I know that I can't. I got to move on. So and no tea, no shade. This is a big part of the reason why this individuality has been kind of lost. Fabric tales did actually gain in popularity, um, partially because of I will say, like the expensiveness and inaccessibility of full silicone tails. Fabric tails became more popular, but mainly once people could understand how to make them look like full silicone tails. So at a glance, these look more like the silicone tails that we looked at before, but what these are actually printed fabric tails. So you print the design on fabric and the design is like a scan of a 3D looking image. So it looks like there are scales on there and it looks like there are three-dimensional details, but they're actually just like a flat image that's printed and then sewn together. I think that they're a really great option for a lot of people for sure. I think that there's something that I probably would have really wanted when I was younger and really wanted a full silicone tail but couldn't afford one. But unfortunately, the proliferation of printed fabric tails really kind of killed the DIY fabric tail aspect of the community. Like there are still for sure people swimming around in homemade fabric tails, but it's way more common now to see printed fabric tails, and they just don't have as much individuality by their nature. So as you can see, like in this top left corner here, this is a line of Finfolk fabric tails. They usually come out with one. I think it's every month, maybe it's every couple of months, but they come out with like five or so, and you can, get a certain membership that gives you early access to it. It's a whole thing now. It's just a whole different system. But you'll see like 10 different people with the same tail design because they kind of bought them like you would buy pre-made clothing off the rack now. Whereas in the 2010s and early 2020s, you wouldn't really see that. Every tail that you saw was either custom made by hand by the person who was making it, or it was commissioned from a tail maker by the person who was wearing it, or it was bought secondhand from another mer. But either way, they were all individual works of art. And that's just not as true anymore, and it's something that I miss. Um, so let's talk a little bit about what you would do if you did want to make your own fabric tail. So of course you would need a monofin, swimmable fabric, which would probably one of the best fabrics you could choose would either be four-way stretch, which is important, not two-way, four-way stretch, spandex or lycra, which is also often called performance fabric, neoprene or scuba knit is also pretty good. If you're just starting though, I'd probably recommend spandex or lycra, and it's helpful if you've sewn with non-stretchy materials before, but you can do it even if you haven't. You also probably want a sewing machine and obviously thread. And the stitch that you want to use for sewing stretchy fabric is a zigzag stitch. The reason why you want the fabric to be stretchy is because you need it to conform to your body as much as possible. The tight constriction of the tail is what lets you have all of the control in the water. It's what basically forms it as a second skin to your body so that you can exist in the water as if you had a natural, like, natal tail. So you want your tail to be as tight as possible. It will feel very constricting on land. It should, because in the water there's water. I don't know if you knew this, but in the water there's water, and water tends to like get into things and waterlog them and bog them down. So if it's very tight on land to you, it will be actually slightly looser in the water. So yeah, not cotton. Cotton is very not swimmable. You don't want anything that's going to get bogged down in the water. Think of something that you would wear as a bathing suit. If you could find it in a bathing suit material, it's a lot more likely to be a good swimmable material. You might get away with a cotton bikini, but like you're not gonna find a cotton like wet like diving wetsuit. So yeah, there's water in the water, low key. It's all around in there. I don't know if you knew. But drag is a very important factor when it comes to swimming, and you really want to minimize drag if you can, especially if you're new. So, ways to minimize one of the big ways to minimize that is making sure that your fabric is as tight as possible, and spandex is really good for doing that because it stretches, so you can make it like slightly smaller than yourself, and it will stretch when you get inside of it. So optional for adding extra pizzazz would be like ink or paints. Permaset Aqua is a good brand, but I'll use straight up craft paint, the dollar store stuff. It works really well actually. Sometimes the cheaper the paint is, the better it like seeps into the fabric, so it really holds on really well. Sequins, you can use actually a creative one I've seen for like making spines or fins are zip ties, really cool. Vinyl shelf liner is one that I think Hannah Fraser actually pioneered, so that makes a really cool flowy fin like looking thing. Aquarium tubing is also really good for getting that ribbed like effect. A lot of materials that you wouldn't necessarily think of to that would be tail making materials are what people have historically made tails out of. The most important thing is that it's not something that's going to bog you down in the water. So you want, or and it's something that's going to degrade in the water. So you want things that are designed to go in the water or designed to get wet. So vinyl shelf liner is designed to, not hold on to spills and be able to be easy to clean. So it's waterproof. So is aquarium tubing. Zip ties are made of plastic. Things like that are much better and safer to use than anything like, I don't know. cotton is just don't use straight up cotton. It will drag you down. Don't do that. Um, so in terms of the actual steps you would use, first you want to decide on your monofin. I gave you some tools and examples for how you would do that. Then you want to design your tail skin around your monofin. All the monofins are different sizes and shapes. So the tail skin that you design or commission has to be specifically designed to work with your monofin. So yeah, the designing part comes second to knowing what monofin that you are using. An optional one is to measure yourself or to have someone measure you or to make a body form with a duct tape or with duct tape. Um, some people will say that that's not optional. The reason why I say that it's optional is because I use a method for tail making that doesn't necessarily involve having to do that. It's easier if you do, but I have done it without doing that before. Most people how they'll do it is they'll kind of do it like a pillow. They'll cut the shape of their body and the tail all together, two sides, and sew it together like a pillow. So for that, you do need to measure yourself because it needs to be exactly to your measurements when you cut it. But for I do this kind of like chaos magic sew as you go thing where I'll just sort of like pinch and pin the fabric around me and then try it on and then sew it down like a tube that gets smaller and smaller as it goes down and try it on again, and if it's not tight enough I'll sew it in a little bit more, and eventually I'll get something that fits really well. Um, I recommend doing that? For a first timer, yes and no. There's some benefits and some drawbacks. The obvious drawback is that it's very chaos magicy. You might not get like a perfect outcome, although I've had much more imperfect outcomes with the pillow style. Um, but the another drawback is that you can sometimes get a really big seam, and then you have to like figure out how to not have that rubbing up against you on the inside. But one of the big benefits and reasons why I do it is because it leaves you with, instead of having two seams on the side, which most fabric tails do, especially the printed ones, it leaves you with only one seam on the back, which is really cool because it makes you look a lot more naturalistic. Like, especially if you're going to be swimming around kids and you're the kind of person that cares about maintaining magic for kids or something. Um, which, I also, even though that's not the primary reason why I'm there, I will try to maintain, that mermaids are real and magic is real for kids. So I will try not to take off my tail in front of them and things like that. But if you have no visible seams, it makes kids a lot more likely to believe that you're a natural mer, which is really cool. And you can even hide the back seam really well by inserting a piece of fabric, like sandwiching it between the fabric as you sew and creating yourself a little dorsal fin. So, I do tend to go with the chaos magic one because I like only having one seam on the back, even if it's a little bit more difficult to get right. If you do go with that, I would probably recommend making a body form the first time because it'll just make things a lot easier, or having someone help you. Okay. So that's pretty much most of the fun stuff. I mean, this next part, it's less fun, but it's much more important, to be honest. Now we're talking about safety. I could not do a Mermaiding 101 panel without talking about safety. Um, Historically, your safety as an individual mer is the safety of the entire mer community. If you've attempted to go tail swimming before and you've been turned away from a pool or a body of water by a lifeguard, this may be due to the unfortunate side effect of the mermaiding boom that happened in the late 2010s and early 2020s, where a lot of people put on tails for fun and went swimming without the guidance of experienced mers. That didn't really happen before the mermaiding boom of that era because everyone who was in the mer community was here for some kind of niche reason. So, you only got into tail making by being a part of the community. And so you only got to the point of tail swimming by going through the community processes. Unfortunately, once it became more popular and people really found it, they started doing a lot more unsafe practices that no mer would ever tell you to do. And so there were videos proliferating. This is like a bit of a content warning because it's a little bit sad, but not too sad. Nothing bad really like happens, but it's a little bit uncomfortable. There were videos that would proliferate of kids in tails nearly drowning, and having to be saved. And so those videos would convince everyone that mermaid tails are unsafe toys, which is really unfortunate because for a lot of us, myself included, they're more like prosthetics that you need education to be able to use safely. And so that led to mermaid tails widely getting banned in a lot of places. Whereas before, most people didn't know about them. So a place might approve it or disapprove it on a case by case basis. More often than not, you show up to a pool, they wouldn't expect to see, they don't know what you're walking in with. It looks like a tail or whatever. You put it on in the water, and once they see that you can swim, you're good. Um, or if you couldn't swim, they'd be like, hey, that's not safe, get out. But that was, like I said, very rare because getting to the point of tail swimming, a prerequisite of that was going through the community. Once people were able to get tails without kind of going through that process, often you'd walk into a pool with a tail or with fins, and they would turn you away. And that made it really hard for mer people to find safe places to swim. Um, I will say personally, I've developed a penchant for swimming in places where there are no lifeguards for this reason. And that's unfortunate. Like I definitely at this point I enjoy it more because the anxiety of knowing that there are lifeguards who can take my tail away or tell me not that I can't swim anymore after I've already started and I might be shifted now, which is really disheartening. It's made it so that I'm much more likely to swim in places where there aren't safety precautions because of that. So, please, please be safe, as safe as you can while swimming, and I'll talk about some more ways that you can do that. One of those is a tail is something that you have to work up to. Um, we really don't want you to endanger yourself because your safety is important, but it's also the safety of everyone else, and we don't want to make that problem worse. Before you make or before you put on and swim in a tail, you must train to become a strong swimmer. You have to be a strong swimmer or at least somewhat comfortable in the water first. You have to practice holding your breath out of water. You have to get comfortable in the water and learn how to not panic. Once you can do that, you can start practicing a dolphin kick and holding your breath. Once you can do that, you can add scuba fins. Once you can swim with scuba fins, holding your breath in a dolphin kick, then you can graduate to a monofin. These are these natural progressions that over time make you more and more constricted in the water. Unfortunately, even if you like are a mer internally, the body sometimes still needs to acclimate to being constricted underwater. Not for everyone, I will say. Like my transition through these steps was very rapid, and I was able to skip them. I felt much more natural in the water with a monofin than in any other sense, and you might too. But it's still really important that you at least try the steps and feel comfortable with each one before moving on to the next one for your own safety and for the safety of the mer community. Once you feel comfortable dolphin kicking with a breath hold and a monofin, then you can add a tail skin on top of the monofin. So now you've gone from just your feet being bound to your feet and legs being bound together. Once you've, oh, and the tailskin should be fabric to start because it's less constrictive than something like silicone. It also has less drag than things like individual scale tails, things with sequins, all that extra stuff. You want to like literally start as bare bones as possible, work your way up to extra fins and things like that once you know you're comfortable swimming in a tail. It also makes it a lot more easy for you to advocate for yourself as a strong mer swimmer if someone tries to turn you away. And you can say, no, I can do this. I am safe. Let me show you. Um, don't swim alone as well. Even if you can't swim with other mer people, take a trusted friend, someone who you can tell that you are tail swimming, someone that is at least somewhat educated on what to do on water safety. Um, but don't swim, especially if you're in a place where there's no lifeguards. Make sure that you're not going alone. Um, Make sure that you feel comfortable with whoever is there and that they are aware of the conditions of the water. Make sure that your tail is in good condition. Let me take a water break, actually. Hold on. Mm. Okay, make sure your tail is in good condition, that it fits tightly, and that your monofin is not broken, and that it can propel you and your tail adequately. So check your monofin and check your tail before each time swimming. Make sure that you feel comfortable. If it feels too loose or like you can't control yourself, it's better to just get out of the water, especially while you're new. You don't want to, have an incident. Yeah, MERS need water. I've been talking a lot. I'm very dehydrated. Because we only have I did give permission to get an extra 30 minutes to make sure that there's like time for questions and everything at the end. But there's a lot to get through, so I wanted to make sure that I had time for all of that. Oh, and I put it in the slides, but I didn't say, um Treading water is also pretty important to get used to. Try to make sure that you can do it with or without your tail, because you might need to abandon your like it's you probably won't, but you might need to abandon your tail in an emergency. So make sure that you can swim with or without a tail. And again, never swim in the tail without a monofin. I mentioned it earlier. The reason why is, like I mentioned before, drag is a really big bad thing that you want to minimize. Even if you're a powerful swimmer, less drag is still better. So if you have a tail on and no monofin, you have a lot of drag and no propulsion. That's not a good equation. So make sure that you at least have a monofin. Put a tail skin on after you have a monofin already. Okay, more more safety stuff. So when it comes to practicing your breath holds, free diving tables are a really great resource. They're progressive diving or breath hold tables that are designed to help you mentally and physically acclimate to holding your breath for longer. So there's two core components to training your breath hold. There's resistance to CO2, just carbon dioxide building up in your body, and training for resistance to low oxygen or O2. So there's two things: low oxygen and high CO2. CO2 training sometimes is considered more important, not like intuitively, but by freedivers, because the high CO2 is actually what tends to trigger the overwhelming desire to breathe and go to the surface. So if you train for CO2, you'll probably be able to increase your mental and physical resilience. Well, mainly your mental resilience, to stay under longer. But training for low O2 will actually help your body function longer under the water. So both are important. Low O2 is better to actually physically function in the water longer. CO2 is better to mentally keep you from feeling like you need to surface, or also keeping you from feeling like you're panicked. So yeah, those are breath hold tables in a nutshell. Be careful. You should practice your breath hold on land before in the water for sure. However, even on land, your breath hold is dangerous. Like anytime you're holding your breath is inherently a little dangerous. So that's part of why it's better to practice on land first. But you really want to get to like know your limits and know what's safe for you, and you can customize these tables yourself. So if you can't hold your breath for 2 minutes, don't start there. Start with 10 seconds. Start with 20 seconds. You can These are just example tables. You can create your own. You can also use an app called Stamina Apnea Trainer that will help you build custom tables as well. Another thing that's like a less commonly known thing that I like to do is blowing up balloons. You can get a pack from the dollar store, blow them up all the time. It might look weird, but it really helps your lung capacity over time. And it's also very inexpensive. So yeah, free ways to stay underwater longer, with the safety caveat of practice on land first and make sure that you don't pass out. Um, okay, we're almost done here, but there's some more safety stuff still. Um, you also want to check your swim spots for safety, especially if you're trying to swim someplace where there's not lifeguards. So some things to look out for are: what type of water is it? Is it a pool? Is it a natural body of water? Is it chlorine or saline, freshwater, saltwater? Those are like sometimes not as important for safety, but sometimes they can be. Um, how will it affect your body? How will it affect your tail? How deep is it? Really important for safety. Does the depth vary significantly? Does it change quickly? Is it consistent? Or does it change predictably? Those are all really important. Are there rocks? Are they slippery? Are they really big and sharp? Is there delicate wildlife? Wildlife that could be harmful to your health? Are there dangerous tides? Are there currents or waterfalls that could drag you under? Are there potentially dangerous microorganisms? Stuff that you don't really want to think about when you're trying to enjoy mermaiding, but it's really important to know. And it's also important for anybody who's with you to know. Um, there are often places that will, if you're going to swim in natural places, they often have websites that will tell you the water conditions for that day and will let you know if they're safe or not to swim in. So if you're going to something like a lake, make sure to check, because sometimes water can be safe one day and unsafe tomorrow. Another thing you can look for is, of course, are there lifeguards? That usually means this is a place that people come to swim often. But if there are not lifeguards, at least check if there are other swimmers. If there are no lifeguards and there's nobody else there swimming, it's probably not a good place to swim. So yeah, consider the location might be unsafe if there's no one else there. Um, so yeah, if there's a locally known swimming spot, you will probably also be able to find some way to either like connect with someone who goes there frequently and can update you on the water quality conditions. There should be some way of monitoring it for any place that's safe to swim. Um, yeah, so that's most of the mermaiding content. Lastly, I just want to talk about other aquatic gear ideas. So you could think of mermaiding essentially as a form of gearing, really. It's kind of like the aquatic version of quadrobics. Um, so there's other options that you can do as well if maybe you're not a mer or you can't use a tail for some reason. Some examples that I've included are like fish scale leggings or tights. You can basically just put those over a swimsuit, and now you have fish scales without the trouble of adding fins or a monofin, and that could be really euphoric and helpful. You can also get these clear sinus saver nose plugs that don't look like you're wearing nose plugs, but they help you like swim underwater and upside down and do flips and things like that without feeling water going up your nose, which would, kind of break that immersion. You can also do things like wearing fishnet gloves that will make it feel like you're actually, maybe you've made these uh, from the garbage of like ships that have gone by or things like that. Things that make you feel more aquatic in any way, or the fact that they look like scales also works. Goggles are a particular brand of goggles that has fins on the side. Those can also be pretty euphoric, and they help you see underwater, which is nice. Web gloves are really great. Make sure that you get swimmable ones because they're not all swimmable. You can find them made of fabric or of silicone. If you're like a sea slug or something, you might want something very frilly, like this pink swimsuit here. You can also get gap wraps. They're usually specialized mermaid attire, but you can find gap wraps and just wear them separately from having a tail or not. You can find ones made out of fish netting. You can find ones that are designed to look like fish scales. But these are other ways that you can feel euphoric in the water that are not specifically mermaiding, and are often more like cheap and accessible to get to. And after this, we've got 3 slides of image credits. So if you check the PDF, you can find the links to all these images, which will also probably be helpful for more information, especially if you're looking to like buy any of those types of monofins. Um, and yeah, that is the end of the panel. So thank you for listening. Now I want to open it up to questions. We should have about 20 minutes left for any questions. So the first one that I'm seeing in panel questions right now is how familiar slash good at regular swimming do you have to be before you start looking into mermaiding? So I'm gonna give advice that is pretty do as I say, not as I do. Um, I was a young kid and a pretty bad swimmer before I got into mermaiding, but I was in swim classes. So I knew the techniques. I just wasn't very good at executing them. And I later found out that that was because I have been a mermaid this whole time. So I wasn't like, I'm not supposed to be swimming like that. So it doesn't work out well for me. I would say that you should at least have been taught to swim by someone. You should have been in water with other people. You should have at least someone know who, like, how your swimming level is. You should have at least one other person who's familiar with your level of swimming. You should have attempted to do things like um, at least a doggy paddle. Like at the very least, a doggy paddle. Know how to float, even if it's just a dead man float, like a little bit. Like be able to swim somewhat. If you can keep yourself from drowning for like 10 minutes, then you can start learning the dolphin kick and doing the progression and such. Um, you can also start in shallow water as long as you know, again, the conditions of the water that you're in. If you're in a pool, you can experiment a lot more easily with doing the dolphin kick and things without having to learn how to tread water because you're not in water that's deeper than you can stand in, and you know it won't get any deeper than that. So, yeah, in general, be able to make sure that you can't drown for quite a while, and you can maybe cheat a little bit if you're in very predictable conditions, but you should always have that goal of making sure that you feel completely comfortable in the water. Dragonfly asks, how are individual silicone scales usually attached? So they're attached with more silicone. Silicone doesn't really stick to anything but itself. So if you want to attach silicone to fabric, you have to use more silicone. The reason why that works though is because fabric is porous. So what happens is that the silicone that you use as like a glue seeps between the pores of the fabric or like the mesh or whatever you're using as a stabilizer. And so it gets kind of it does similarly like to what paint does, but a little bit more strong. So that's what's holding the silicone to the fabric, and then the silicone sticks to the other silicone scales as it's curing, and then that once they're all cured, It's once it's all cured together, the silicone scales are attached to the fabric. So yeah, you have to use more silicone. You can find like silicone based glues, or if you are making your own scales out of like dragon skin silicone or something, or you bought scales out of dragon skin silicone, you can buy more dragon skin silicone to use to mix it up as a glue. That's one of the more common types of silicone that you'll see too. Be careful of what kinds. There's so many different kinds of silicone. You want something body safe, like for sure. Dragon skin is a really safe bet to go with. If you see dragon skin, it's going to be a good one to use. What's your favorite non-tail aquatic gear that you have? That's a really good question. I haven't answered this, a little bit sad, I think. I think it would be jewelry for me. I've always loved swimming with jewelry on. I think I mentioned jewelry in the slides, but I didn't talk about it. But you can swim with swimmable jewelry. Similar rules apply for like every other thing. You know, make sure it won't degrade in the water. So you know, metals that won't completely degrade or tarnish. Um, Anything that's like not too expensive too. So like maybe don't go swimming with like an heirloom gold like diamond necklace. But I would love to wear like seashell necklaces and things like that while I was swimming. And I had this one special crystal seashell necklace that I used to wear constantly, and it would always make me feel connected to my mer self even when I wasn't actively swimming. But I unfortunately don't have that anymore. So yeah, that is really sad. But I would definitely say jewelry. I think that's also connected to the H2O thing because they have those lockets. So that might be part of why jewelry makes me feel so connected to being a mer person. I will also say that like in the Therian community, it's pretty accepted to say like that quadrobics and gear doesn't like make you a Therian or bring you like it could bring you closer to your stereotype maybe, but also maybe not. In the mermaiding community, like that's kind of not true. It's really interesting. So mermaid as it's used in the mer community is kind of somewhat of a separate term than it would be in the human community. Like just having a tail and swimming with it makes you a mermaid in a sense. And for me, they did become very intertwined where like if I can't mermaid for a very long time, I actually feel like less of a mermaid, which is very sad. But yeah, so they can be separate or they can be the same. What do you think about the logistics of a furry tail where an otter? So that's a really good question. I think the principle of minimizing drag applies here a lot as well. But you can definitely add a furry tail. It's gonna be similar if you're minimizing the drag. It should be equivalent to like adding a couple of extra fins. You just again have to make sure that you are very comfortable in a tail that doesn't have the fur on it first. So I would make or acquire like a plain fabric tail, and then attempt to make it furry in various ways that, you know, starting with less bulk. Because especially with something like fur, it's going to drag you down more and more. Another thing that you can do is you can paint a fabric tail to look like fur as well. Or do some other sort of similar texturization that will add texture without adding drag. So a lot of painted fabric tails do that too, where they paint the illusion of scales on and they add sequins for texture. Um, so yeah, that's probably ways that I would go about it. Start with a like a plain fabric tail. See if there are ways you can add like smaller pieces that are fuzzy or furry without you know having to drag you down too much, and make sure that you're in like safe, predictable water like a pool while you're testing it out. Um, Let me see if there's any other questions in. I know that I missed a bunch in the chat. I'm so sorry. I wanted to read them as I was going through, but I knew that I had so much to get through, and I knew that like I was trying to follow a script as well as I could. Hmm. Oh, also I think on the otter tail like conversation, you can also create the feeling of an otter tail without necessarily having a specific otter tail. So like as far as I understand it, otter fur is like very luxurious and like thick and smooth. So if you're able to get something like a neoprene tail with like a very smooth spandex cover on top or something like that, like neoprene with like a very shiny like an oil slick type fabric on top, that could give a similar feel to the normal like what you would normally feel when feeling your own body without, specifically being fur. Okay. Um, oh, I scrolled up way too far in the chat. Let's see. Yeah, I scrolled up way too far. Oh no. Okay. Let me see if there's any questions that I missed in the chat. I didn't get to talk really about mermaid classes. So yeah, Soul mentioned mermaid shows in Wikiwachi Springs. I didn't know that those exist now. That's really cool. I might have learned about. I think I remember hearing about that a long time ago. So maybe I did know that. Mermaid classes didn't used to be a common thing because of the whole like, you have to go through the mer community before you really get into tail swimming, so you have to learn all these things and you kind of learn them along the way. But once they became more popular, I think it became more feasible because, well, it became necessary because people were out here doing dangerous stuff. And also there were enough people to justify having a class and actually being able to like make money off of it. So I don't think that those were really a thing before like the mid 2010s and early 2020s, but they did become more popular around that time. So I'm not really surprised to hear that there's a mermaid class at Wikiwachi. But I think it is really cool, especially given how central Wikiwachi Springs is to the history of the mer community. I think it's really interesting that like newcomers can be a part of that history and may or may not know exactly how foundational the spot that they're in is. Let's see if there's anything else that I miss. There's so many things that I wanted to mention, like while I was presenting that I think I forgot about. Yeah, yeah, stuff about being landlocked. It's 5:20, so if I don't see any other unanswered questions posted in the chat, I might call it in like a minute or two. Oh, yeah, Shiloh mentioned that the movie Splash was what popularized the name Madison. That is true. That is really it exploded in popularity after that movie, which is really cool. Cowell Gunner said, "Would you be free for more questions later after the panel?" Absolutely. Answering questions about mermaiding is like one of my favorite things. Talking about mermaiding in general is always like one of my favorite things forever. And also the whole safety thing. There's a reason why I had so many slides about it. Mermaiding safety is really important because I care about everyone. So I genuinely care about your safety individually, and I care so much about the community that I also care about their safety as well and about like our access to spaces, and those are all very interconnected. So if you have any questions on like mermaiding in general, expressing yourself better within the context of a mer environment, um or like the history of the mer community, mermaiding safely, making a tale for yourself, commissioning a tale from someone else, things like that, or anything really that you can think of, I am more than happy to answer. If you don't want to ask publicly, feel free to DM me. um just let me know that you like want to ask about mermaiding stuff, and I'll be like, heck yeah, anything, whatever you want to know. Let me see if I missed anything else. I can't believe they're putting water in the water. Yes, some lycra is cotton blended. That's a good point. Check the fiber listing for sure. You want to, so yeah, if you're ever looking for a spandex fabric, it should list the percentage of what is spandex, what is lycra, what is cotton, what is anything else in there. It should say like, at least probably at least 80% spandex, I think. I'm trying to think if I've ever worn anything less than 80% spandex. It should be a very high percentage of spandex and a very low percentage of anything that isn't stretchy. So like, 80% or like even like 50% spandex, 40% lycra. Like that's good. Um but like 20% spandex, 80% cotton, that's a no-go. And the fabric should list it. If you can't tell what it's made of, don't assume that it's safe for swimming. Um yeah. Dragonfly says, "How common is it for mercs to use tails and stuff, but not really swim in them at all? We're afraid of the water and can't swim at all, but the aesthetic of a fabric plus individual scale tail is so cool." So yeah, it's not uncommon. Like I mentioned in the beginning that like mermaiding is generally considered to be tail making specifically for swimmable tails and swimming in tails, but a very common exception for that classification is when someone can't swim for some reason, and being afraid of the water is a valid reason. It's and like if your heart, I would say like it's mermaiding if it feels like mermaiding to you. So it's definitely not uncommon. I remember seeing MERS on the forums. Again, a lot of this is like somewhat hearsay because, like, I promise you I was there and I saw it, but it's not as easy to see now. Um, but I promise you, I did see people who had tails. They were beautiful tails that were actually made of things like, mesh and cotton that you cannot swim with, but the tail wasn't intended for swimming, so it didn't matter. And they would use these like really pretty round sequins that and they would like the way they would place them was very cool. And yeah, the tail was not safe for the water, but it was very beautiful to just watch them like sit on a beach with it, or like sit on a rock with it, or on a couch. So yeah, it's definitely not uncommon for MERS to use tails but not swim in them at all. Um Oh, another common how could I forget this? Another super common thing is like mermaid story times. That's a huge thing. So, that doesn't involve water at all, and mer people will have tails of various constructions, most often swimmable because that's easier to get at this point. Um, but they will have their tail, and they'll usually be in some form of like a wheelchair or other, like they'll be carried in by somebody or something like that. But fun fact, the person who does that is called a mertender. So the person who like wheels around a mermaid or carries them into a place is called a mertender. Um, but yeah, so that's another common example for MERS who are using tails but not for swimming. Another common example I'll say is people will just like wear a tail. I'm being so for real, especially like I did this a lot when I was younger. If I was ever really seasick and landlocked, I would often just put a tail on and just lay on the couch or just lay in my bed, and it would help with a little bit just to feel my tail again and like just to feel one singular appendage from the bottom of my body and not like two splitting ones. So yeah, you can just put a tail on and lay down because it feels good. There's no rules. I mean, well, there are rules, but there's no rules for like just be like putting a tail on out of the water to feel good, as long as you don't fall over and hurt yourself. Oh, okay, drama bubbles. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording so I can talk about drama bubbles. Um, the recording is officially stopped on my end. If anybody else is recording, I would also recommend stopping the recording at this point so I can talk about mercury drama.